Oh, Mary, you're on mute.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our ACC NCR and Washington Council of Lawyers Pro Bono program and online fair. I'm Mary Blatch. I'm a Senior Counsel of Privacy at StockX, and I'm also a member of the ACC NCR Pro Bono Committee. We are so grateful to all of you for joining us, and we are thrilled to introduce you to a number of great leaders in providing pro bono legal services, as well as share information that we hope will empower you and your colleagues to engage in more pro bono service. The pandemic changed many things, and pro bono representation was not immune to that evolution. We will talk about those changes and how you can better serve as a volunteer, bring volunteer opportunities to your legal department, and learn about ways to represent clients that you might not have considered. Before we get into the topic at hand, a few items to note. This program is being recorded, as you heard. It will run for approximately 60 minutes, and then we will have a short break and move to the fair portion of this session. We will not be recording the fair, as those will be virtual breakout rooms. During the fair, attendees will have the opportunity to visit various legal service providers to ask any questions you may have and learn about what their organizations do and how to volunteer. For all our attendees that are online today, we ask that you please add your organization to your name in your Zoom square. To do that, simply click the three dots in your own Zoom, simply right-click the three dots in your own Zoom square and click Rename, which will allow you to type in your affiliation. If you are a volunteer that is participating in the fair and joining a breakout room with one of our pro bono organizations, please add the pro bono organization next to your name. Meanwhile, if you have questions for the panelists during the program, feel free to drop them in the chat. If we can't get to them during the session, we're happy to reach back out following the program. With that, I'm going to toss it to our moderator and co-chair for this program, Kirsten Keating.
Thanks, Mary. I'm Kirsten Keating, and I currently serve as Associate General Counsel at Freddie Mac and co-chair of the ACC NCR Pro Bono Committee. Additionally, at Freddie Mac, I serve on the Legal Division's Pro Bono Council and co-chaired our Clinics Committee for the last several years. I can provide more insight into that as the session goes, but want to introduce our panelists and then start asking for their insights. First, we have Daryl Maxwell, who is Director for the DC Bar Pro Bono Center. The center was established more than 40 years ago and is the largest provider of pro bono legal help in the District of Columbia. They serve more than 20,000 individuals, nonprofits, and small businesses each year. Daryl is focused on providing pro bono legal support, education, and counsel to community-based nonprofits and disadvantaged small businesses. We also have Erin Mee, who is the pro bono coordinating attorney with National Veterans Legal Services Program. Erin works with the organization's network of law firms and corporate partners to provide pro bono assistance to veterans on disability-related matters. She also facilitates pro bono case placement and provides guidance to pro bono volunteer attorneys. And she'll share more information about how she does that in the virtual world shortly. Last but not least, Kathy Westcott is Senior Director, Legal Affairs and Deputy General Counsel at Pew Charitable Trusts. She serves on our Pro Bono Committee and the ACC NCR Board. She is also the chapter's Vice President of Community Engagement and Professional Development. Today, we'll hear from Kathy about her extensive experience as a pro bono volunteer and her work with Whitman Walker since 2012. Her most recent case representing Whitman Walker, a Whitman Walker client, was hugely successful, even though it was a new area of representation for Kathy and the work was done entirely remotely. With that, let's get started. So for our panelists, I'm going to ask you to sort of introduce yourself beyond what I might have just mentioned. And also if you could share with us how much remote representation you or your organization was doing pre-pandemic compared to what you're doing now or you see doing going forward. And we can start with Daryl.
Kirsten, thanks so much for that warm and kind introduction. I think you laid out really well sort of the DC Bar Pro Bono Center and our work. And I will say I'll talk a little bit of, it's hard to think back to before the pandemic, what our service model was in comparison to where we are now. But I'll talk a little bit about the Pro Bono Center, its work, and sort of where we've come in the last sort of 3 or so years. As you mentioned, we provide service to, we're the largest provider of pro bono legal services and information in the District of Columbia, and serve, typically over about 20,000 individuals, nonprofits, small businesses. We do that in a number of different ways, both in sort of a limited scope model, in a clinic service model. I'd like to say a walk-in clinic model, which we're sort of getting back to, sort of being in our respective communities and neighborhoods. But we also provide ongoing legal assistance and training and education to individuals in areas such as family law, Social Security, disability, as well as housing, which is a large part of our practice. And as mentioned before, I manage our transactional pro bono practice. And sort of pre-pandemic, a lot of our work was done both in person at the courthouse, serving individuals every day who had matters for particularly the housing court and consumer protection issues. We served a lot of folks in our communities, both nonprofits and small businesses, with walk-in clinics and limited scope clinics where we had volunteers support folks via issues of sort of contract review, intellectual property, things of that nature. So sort of a through line to what happened during the pandemic is sort of everything. In the before times, I don't know that we did any sort of virtual representation, unless you consider sort of taking phone calls and answering questions, virtual representation. So all of those opportunities and all of the work that we were doing became virtual opportunities. And so and I'm sure as many of our colleagues are trying to work through what the right blend and mixture of virtual opportunities and in-person opportunities are going to look like moving forward. I don't, it's, as sort of said in our materials, it doesn't look like it's going to go anywhere. And so we are looking to figure out and sort of gather data as we start to open up more opportunities, how much of our programming remains virtual, and then how much of our programming will come back in some form or fashion to be live and in person. So I don't want to blather on too much, Kirsten, so I think I will stop there.
No, thank you, Daryl. That's I think where a lot of us are. But actually, Aaron, I think your organization might be in a little bit of a different spot in terms of virtual. So sort of put the same question to you, and if you could introduce yourself a little more beyond than what I already said, that'd be great.
Thank you so much, Kirsten, and thank you for having me today. I'm super excited to share with you about the National Veterans Legal Services Program. So my role as the pro bono coordinating attorney, I work with our partner law firm and corporate partners to place pro bono opportunities for veterans with disabilities. And pre-pandemic, we were in an interesting spot in that all of our veterans are located all over the country. We are national in scope. So pre-pandemic, our full scope representation were already virtual. Our lawyers could be located anywhere and our veterans could be located anywhere as well. So it was very common that we'd have a law firm in New York representing a veteran in Texas. Post-pandemic, things have definitely gotten better. We're all more comfortable with Zoom, technology, veterans are as well. So things are much more streamlined in terms of getting in contact and having meetings with our veteran clients. But where things have really changed for us is in limited scope opportunities. And I manage our limited scope opportunities at NVLSP. So we have thousands of veterans who apply to us for help every year. And as a small nonprofit, unfortunately, we're not able to provide assistance to everyone. And the way we make that work is that we request and receive veterans' official medical and personnel files from the VA, and we screen every case looking for meritorious arguments. So when the pandemic happened, we were looking for how can we increase our limited scope opportunities and how can we screen these cases much more quickly? And it kind of meshed together perfectly. So I created a discharge upgrade file review program. So a discharge upgrade is when a veteran is given a less than honorable characterization of service and they want to upgrade that characterization to receive access to benefits. So a very common fact pattern is that a veteran was deployed to combat, comes back home, is struggling with post-traumatic stress disorder, self-medicates with marijuana perhaps, and then is discharged from the military after one drug test. And so there's been recent Department of Defense guidance that says that we can argue that post-traumatic stress disorder related to service or other mental health conditions mitigate the misconduct that led to the discharge and that their discharge characterization should be upgraded. So all of that is to say that when we're going back to our discharge upgrade file review project, we receive the files for veterans who've applied to us for help. There are thousands of pages. And this project is for volunteers to create a chart or a catalog of these client files. It's a volunteer project for NVLSP, return it to us, and that helps our staff attorneys make a decision, yes or no, much more quickly. So the file review project is a great limited scope project that is very helpful to us during our screening process for our cases. Another way that limited scope opportunities have changed post-pandemic is with clinics. So pre-pandemic, we would hold all of our intake initial clinics in person. So we would go to the DC Mayor's Center of Veterans Affairs and meet veterans, or we'd go to San Diego and meet veterans. But post-pandemic, that was not an option. So going back to our screening queue, we were struggling with how do we make clinics work in a post-pandemic world? So what we did was we invited veterans from our screening queue to attend clinics with our law firm and corporate partners. And at these clinics, we ask veterans questions like, what happened during your service? What happened around the time you were discharged? And what have you been up to post-discharge? And all of the facts we gather from these clinic interviews are helpful to us as we screen their case. So we have these, the veterans are located everywhere. So pre-pandemic, we'd be limited to DC veterans or California veterans. And now we have lawyers all over meeting veterans all over. So that's just a bit about how representation has changed in the limited scope world for us, and really looking forward to talking with you more.
No, that's great. Thank you, Erin. It sort of sounds like in some ways, the pandemic actually really helped you all, probably enhance the services you provide. I think a lot of people don't look at the pandemic in that way in terms of the changes that came, but it sounds like it was really probably a positive for you all in the services.
It definitely made us think creatively about how we can serve veterans and work with our pro bono partners.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. It sounds like you guys have made the most of it. Kathy, I'm going to switch to you, sort of a little bit more introduction, but also I'm assuming sort of your pro bono work you did before is probably mostly in person. Sort of talk a little bit about what that looks like now or going forward, do you think?
Yeah, thanks, Kirsten. So again, Kathy Westcott, I'm Deputy General Counsel at the Pew Charitable Trust. I've been in the nonprofit world my entire career, and have always done pro bono as much as I could, given whatever job I was doing at the time. I've been at Pew for 10 years now, and thankfully have the ability to do pro bono. Prior to the pandemic, I would say, to Kirsten's point, most of my pro bono work was done in person through clinical experiences. I've worked with a number of different organizations, but the most significant work I've done has been with the Whitman Walker Legal Services Program. And I worked both in their name and gender change clinic and also the Medicare Part D clinic. And Medicare Part D, a lot of that ended up being virtual because that pro bono work is, using technology to find appropriate healthcare plans for clients, and then talking with clients over the phone. But prior to the pandemic, the Name and Gender Clinic, that was in person at Whitman Walker's facilities. And so the pandemic shifted that work into the virtual environment. And I think I would say kudos to Whitman Walker. I think it was fairly seamless. And they were able to provide the resources, I think, to the volunteer attorneys, both in terms of having an electronic platform where we can pull forms from, but also having mentors at the clinic themselves that can help us when we have questions.
Thank you, Kathy. I mean, I think it is kind of amazing how everybody has pivoted, right? I mean, I was before the pandemic, people talk about video conferencing. I'm like, I'm not doing a video conference, but look at us now, right? This is what we do sort of all day, every day. I'll share a little bit about Freddie Mac's pro bono program. So at Freddie Mac, we have a pretty robust, well-established pro bono program in the legal division. The program has sort of ebbed and flowed over the years, and was really reinvigorated about 10 years ago when we joined the Corporate Pro Bono Challenge as a signatory, aiming for at least 50% participation across the division. We have a pro bono procedure or policy, if you will, which identifies the specific pro bono program organizations that we work with. It also provides that time spent on pro bono matters for our partner organizations will be treated as regular work time, with obviously the understanding that you do your regular day job in a timely manner. But we're really fortunate to have the support of our general counsel and division leadership, encouraging both attorneys and non-attorneys to give back to our community by providing pro bono services. We really offer a menu of opportunities that range from sort of one and done discrete clinics with no ongoing representation to more in-depth full-day clinics where at the end of the clinic, you'll produce legal documents, to really sort of a full-scale representation, which for us is unique in that we don't partner with outside counsel on those. We've been partnering with Legal Services of Northern Virginia to host clinics since the beginning. First, it was sort of one clinic a year, and that has expanded to we host 6 clinics with LSNV each year. But pre-pandemic, all of these clinics were in person. And when the pandemic hit, we really had to shift to virtual clinics, like all of you. I think the biggest challenges for us was figuring out how to transmit documents with the privacy protections, and then also sort of how to consult with LSNV throughout the clinic to answer our volunteer questions. Like they used to be in our conference room and, they kind of circle around. You'd say you had a question. It was very simple. And I think, we successfully, working with LSNV, were able to shift our model from in-person to virtual. But I would say I think there are some differences. I mean, I think in some ways it's easy for volunteers. They don't need to go anywhere. All you do is log on. I think there's fewer opportunities for our non-legal professionals or non-attorney professionals to help out in in-person clinics. They were helping us copy documents and escorting people through security. And there were sort of more things that they could do to help when we were in person. I think for clients, on the positive side, they don't have to travel to our offices, which sometimes can be challenging for clients, multiple bus routes or expensive, cab or, it's not easy. I think technology is fantastic. It can also be a challenge for some of our clients. They don't all have access to join a video call. So the conversations are over the phone. I think there's probably something lost there. Operationally for us, I think it's more time consuming on the front end when we do our clinics, just sort of getting the documents securely, QCing them, getting them to our client. For the volunteers, they get the batch of documents. They can look at those on their own time. We do a virtual training, like a recorded training so they can do. So it's very simple for our volunteers. I think it makes it easy. I think the biggest thing though that I think about though is the number of clients that we serve, because in person, we would serve probably 20 clients per clinic in person. With virtual, just given the nature of the transmission of documents and sort of technology, we probably serve 5 to 10 clients per clinic. That's a significant drop. So I think it's a bit of a mixed bag. There are definitely positives to the virtual representation, and there's some drawbacks too. And going forward for 2023, I think, like you said, Daryl, we're sort of looking at figuring out how to offer some in person and some virtual, and we'll just have to see how that goes. And I want to make sure we're able to serve as many clients as possible, making it as easy for everybody as well. So that's kind of our experience at Freddie Mac. Kathy, I know that your organization doesn't have a formal pro bono program, but obviously you're very engaged in pro bono work. Sorry. Can you talk a bit about sort of how you find those opportunities and sort of share your thoughts on virtual pro bono representation?
Sure, and I won't hide my bias. ACC NCR is an amazing chapter, and we have an awesome pro bono committee that has really expanded the opportunities for chapter members to engage in pro bono work. And Kirsten and Michael's leadership on that committee, I think, just continues to grow the outreach and ability for our members to engage in pro bono. As Kirsten said, the Pew Charitable Trust, we don't have a formal policy. It is something that I continue to talk to the general counsel about, because I think it's really important, especially for in-house counsel that may have relatively sizable departments. I mean, we have more than 15 attorneys in our department now. So, with relatively large departments, in-house departments, I really think it's important for departments to have a formal policy about pro bono. It's important as attorneys, not just to do our day job, but to give back to the community. And many jurisdictions where people are barred actually have some sort of pro bono requirement. And so I would definitely pitch for those of you who have a department that may not have a formal policy. I would encourage you to raise it in your department and really talk about what might be possible. And in the DC area, there are many opportunities to volunteer.
Thank you, Kathy. So I'm going to go a little bit out of order of sort of what I had planned for today with that. Erin, I know you have sort of a network of firms and corporate partners that you work with on the Lawyers Serving Lawyers project. Do you have any advice for us about starting a more formal pro bono effort within in-house legal departments? Hoping you can sort of share some insights there.
Sure. So our model is based off of forming long-standing, deep relationships with our pro bono law firm and corporate partners. So our model does not provide one-off individual opportunities to single volunteers. So as a legal services organization, I would highly recommend that any in-house or organization looking to form a formal pro bono structure would attempt to do that in order to expand the type and number of pro bono opportunities available to volunteers. And I want to talk about the reason why we prefer to work with formal pro bono structures is that we have seen that our veteran clients are served in a much more robust way when we work with formal pro bono structures. And that's because when staffing at matter, people get busy, work gets busy, personal life gets busy, and perhaps pro bono takes a backseat for a while. If there's a formal pro bono structure, there are people on the bench that can step in and make sure that the client is served. So that's why we really appreciate a formal pro bono structure. It's also great because the formal pro bono structure develops some kind of institutional knowledge of the pro bono case type. And so internally, there can be dialogue about how to best help the client before reaching out to our mentoring attorneys. So it's great in that the veterans are served in a more robust way. So I definitely recommend forming a pro bono structure, reaching out to organizations to figure out how to build these long-standing relationships to help pro bono clients.
Thank you. That's really great. And I do think the pro bono is, not everybody can do it. Some legal divisions are bigger or smaller, but if you can sort of create a more formal support for that pro bono services is really great. Daryl, I wanted to ask you sort of, I know that like I think your small business clinic is still virtual. And then you said you're not sure how things are going to play out going forward with virtual versus in person. Are there opportunities either in that small business, like opportunities that you think are unique to virtual representation with the DC Bar Pro Bono Center?
Sure. No, that's a great question. So our small business clinic, we are sort of, I think in April, we're going to be back in person, but we are going to continue to have a virtual presence. Of what type, we're not exactly sure yet. You know, one of the things that we've seen over the course of the last 3 years is having the ability to utilize volunteers who are licensed to practice in the District of Columbia, but who are, you know, located elsewhere. So a lot of representations utilizing volunteers who maybe aren't necessarily either in the area or aren't easily accessible to come. I mean, and again, nobody's been coming in person to do representations, but we've seen a great deal of volunteers with employment expertise who we've found might be right outside of the local area, you know, who might be sort of as far as, you know, as far north as, I'm not talking super far, Baltimore, you know, maybe down in sort of Newport News, Virginia, who work either for firms or for in-house for corporations who want to provide some assistance and are able to do so virtually, either of a limited scope or even possibly maybe a little bit more of on a long-term basis. And it's the case, employment is just sort of the first sort of thing that I'm thinking of, but this is the case in employment law and corporate governance. I was talking to a colleague, I think, on Wednesday, and she mentioned that most of our ongoing representation matters. She said, I don't want you to say that we're 100% virtual, because there is some possibility that, you know, if you're in the midst of, you know, if there's a hearing for a Social Security disability case, we might have to come in person. So it's 95% virtual. But I would say for I don't know. To your question, Kirsten, I'm not sure if there's a particular type of representation that is better to be, you know, or better handled virtually via the Pro Bono Center, but there are certainly a lot of opportunities, and you know, we've made all of our opportunities sort of available where, you know, and sort of as has been said by the other panelists, all of our opportunities sort of, you know, we would plan for introductory meetings to be in person, so there would be some connection between the client and the volunteer, but most certainly now all of that stuff is sort of started off virtually, and if there are opportunities for us to meet in person, we do that. And I also want to mention and sort of echo sort of Kathy's sentiments about making sure that all of the in-house volunteers that we've worked with who have sort of championed the efforts and have mentioned that from the top, you know, the general counsel and the leadership in the corporation have supported pro bono. It makes for a much easier process for our volunteers to participate and for us to build longer standing relationships. So there, you know, for folks who are thinking about, well, I'm not really sure what I want to do, or I want to be able to do this great work, but I don't think I don't foresee being able to do it in person. You know, I think there are any number of opportunities for us to support them.
Daryl, just to follow up a little bit, so do you feel like you're hearing from volunteers that there's a preference for virtual versus in person, or sort of what are you hearing there? And do you feel like, I mean, I think some virtual is here to stay, right? But do you feel like you will be able to sort of meet the needs sort of on both sides of in person and virtual?
It's
the volunteers, but then also the clients, right?
Yeah. And that's part of the reason we have sort of dipped our toe into a couple of in-person only programs, both to get a sense for our individual client interest and capacity to be able to come back to a place during the day, and to see if volunteers are going to be interested in, in some cases, volunteers are just going back to the place where they work because we're partnering with a law firm that's going to host us. In other cases, we're asking other volunteers to come from their homes or from their respective offices to go someplace. And we're sort of building up a little bit of that information. I don't know that I have a sense yet, or that we have a sense yet for whether there's a particular preference. But I've gotten a lot of feedback that our lawyers or lawyer volunteers are ready to be back in person, and they want, and they've been sort of thirsting for being back in person. And we're getting a lot of new volunteers, and one of the things that I had to be reminded of was there are some young lawyers too. Again, there's some young lawyers who spent some time, who spent time while in law school virtual. And so we're getting a surprising amount of, second and third year lawyers who were like, oh, I can't wait to do, to talk with clients in person as opposed to via screen. So I think there's certainly an increasing demand for in-person services. And so we certainly want to try to accommodate that and make sure obviously it's safe and makes sense for our volunteers as well as our client population. And so that's sort of going to be a work in progress. I definitely haven't gotten a sense yet that there's a preference for one versus the other.
Okay. But probably some of both going forward, sounds like.
I would say probably 60/40, maybe 70/30. Virtual versus in person.
Okay.
Maybe ticking up a little bit as we get sort of closer to the start of 2024.
Okay, great, thank you. It's a challenge, like because we're in uncharted territory, all of us the last 3 years, and going forward, we're still in, people are back in their offices some days, in a hybrid schedule, and it's all uncharted territory. Erin, if you could sort of talk about, it sounds like a lot of your work is virtual. I'm kind of curious though, when you mentioned that, a lot of your work was virtual before, but so what do you see the differences now? Because I do think, Kathy mentioned it too, sort of virtual pre-pandemic just meant I talked to you on the phone, right? I think it's a little different now with all the video conferencing. How has that enhanced the pro bono services for your clients? Oh, you're on mute.
Sorry.
Bound to happen once.
It definitely has changed in terms of our clinic opportunities and our ability to provide brief service and advice to a variety of veterans and service members across different case types. So we actually have received feedback that our volunteers do not want to be in person. They really like that they don't have to commute, that they can meet with our clients for an hour, and then their pro bono is done. So before it would be an all-day obligation, but now they can get back to their billable work. So the feedback that I've received is that they love that they can meet with a veteran or a service member for an hour and then get back to business. So like I said, our virtual clinics for meeting with veterans and service members are expanding. Even recently, we have that next month for a different case type. And that is for veterans who are disabled or injured, but who are service members who are currently still serving. And they're deciding if they want to fight to stay in and try to rehabilitate, or if they want to be medically retired, which is the end of their service, they receive a benefit and their service is terminated. So we are going to partner with a law firm to provide brief service and advice to these service members and give them advice if they should fight to stay in, or if potentially they should fight to get maximum medical retirement benefits. So this is going to be an interesting clinic in that our staff attorneys are going to join the meetings themselves. Our discharge upgrade interviews are more intake interviews. The volunteers can ask, what have you been up to? What are your goals? And our attorneys don't need to be there. Medical retirement is a pretty legally dense area of the law. So our attorneys are going to be there just to help, just in case there's any questions along the way. So we're really excited for that clinic next month. And our screening file reviews, we have opened that up to paralegals and admin staff. And it's been a really great opportunity to expand our work with non-legal professionals in the pro bono veteran space. So I love virtual representation. I think it's great, and I think it's here to stay. And for our program, we are just going to expand it as we go on.
Yeah, it sounds like it's been really great for you all. What about your veterans, like the clients? How are they with sort of feel about the virtual?
So in general, it can be good and bad. It depends on the client population. We have some who are in rural areas whose internet maybe isn't the best. In those cases, we do everything we can to meet with them by phone. We try to find vet centers. Often there are vet centers in states generally within an hour of the client, and the vet centers generally have great internet, are happy to work with us and set up meetings there. In terms of clinics, I have a lot of little tips and tricks for meeting with people. I recommend sending reminder emails a week before, the day before, sending instructions for how to join the Zoom, trying to get alternate contact information, and also sending volunteers the client's email, cell phone number, just in case there are any issues day of. We had a really crazy thing happen. The veteran went into labor during her clinic appointment. So obviously we rescheduled with her, but that was one of the benefits of virtual pro bono service, is that if it was in person, she would not have even been able to come. So we were able to serve her virtually a couple of weeks later.
Well, that's quite the pro bono experience, right?
Yes, yeah, very interesting.
This was legal pro bono services, not medical, but.
So it's been great. It's been great. I would say I would just train volunteers to have sensitivity to different levels of comfort with Zoom, different levels of internet access. I think remaining flexible and having an open mind and being willing to reschedule is key. And also understanding that the population you're working with may be struggling with mental health challenges, and that always being open to coming back to a topic, revisiting a topic later on, stating that we understand this is hard to talk about, and we will connect with you at the end of the meeting or at a later date if you feel more comfortable. So virtual representation in terms of joining a meeting and also the topics discussed. My tips and tricks are open-mindedness and remaining flexible.
That's great. That's great. I think we could all do that well with that in all parts of our lives, probably. Open mind and flexible. I like that. So I want to talk a little bit about, I know sort of a lot of our members, we've done clinics. I want to talk a little bit about sort of limited scope representations. We've touched on that a bit, but Kathy, I know you've had, you sort of mentioned it in the intro. If you could tell us about sort of your recent experience volunteering with Whitman Walker on sort of a limited scope representation, that'd be great.
Sure. So as I mentioned, I've been a long-term volunteer with Whitman Walker, and mostly that has been in the name and gender clinic and also the Medicare Part D. And so with the name and gender clinic, you know, that's a couple hours of volunteer when it was in person and even when it was virtual. And with Medicare Part D, also a couple of hours, but not in a clinic setting, but on your own time, you know, researching online plans for clients. This past year, Whitman Walker reached out and asked if I would be willing to take on more of an extended representation in a client whose insurance plan was denying gender affirming surgery. I had a little bit of trepidation because I know nothing about insurance whatsoever. Amy did a great job of convincing me that I could do that and that they would be behind me 100% to support, and which they were. You know, I think some of the positives were that my client had the ability to use Teams with me. So we met probably I would say half a dozen times over a 6-month period of time that I was representing her. And we used Teams. It was a great platform for us to communicate, strategize about her case. You know, I was able to provide her with updates. I emailed with Whitman Walker and had some telephone calls with them. So in terms of the representation, I prepared an appeal packet that I submitted to the insurance company through their appeal process. I also prepared a packet for the DC Department of Insurance Securities and Banking and the DC Healthcare Ombudsman. And those two packets were basically just the insurance appeal packet that I had submitted with a cover sheet. So that wasn't, in either of those cases, it wasn't a really big lift. I also strategized with the client about contacting her employer's HR director to talk about the healthcare plan and the denial that had been issued by the insurance company. Over a 6 months period of time, I probably spent between 15 and 20 hours. Again, Whitman Walker was great, and they gave me a number of examples of prior appeals that had been submitted. So a lot of the existing law and research was already done for me, and I could put it together with the client-specific information. I think we lost with the insurance company. The bottom line is the insurance company said, yeah, appreciate your appeal. We're still going to deny you. But literally in the same week that we got the denial of the appeal, and I was talking with the client about, okay, what are our next steps? I got a phone call from the healthcare ombudsman that said that the independent entity that reviews such denials and appeals has ruled in my client's favor. And so they were reaching out to the insurance company to say, you're violating DC law and you must cover this surgery. And so it was funny because we were kind of on a downside on like a Monday, and then by Thursday we were like dancing virtually on Teams. It was a great experience. And again, kudos to Whitman Walker for the great support that I had. Again, I think if it may have been a different feel if my client couldn't do Teams, because I think it was really helpful for me to be able to see her and see how she reacted to the idea of talking to the director of her HR department, for example. That could be a very touchy situation. And so, we spent a good period of time talking about the pros and cons to that. And it was helpful for me to be able to see her body language. And I would say, just as a side note, the HR director was very responsive when I reached out and said, this is who I am. I'm a volunteer attorney, representing one of your employees who's been denied this surgery by the insurance company. And that company, based on the denial that occurred for their employee, and the HR director also said other conversations they were having, they ended up deciding to change their healthcare plan moving forward. And so not only did we win with the DC ombudsman, healthcare ombudsman, but the company changed their insurance plan. So that type of surgery and a laundry list of other surgeries will be protected moving forward. I'm trying to think of anything else. I mean, I'm happy to answer any questions that people have. But yeah, I guess I'll leave it there.
Well, I mean, that's a great experience, right? Because I do think, people want to do pro bono service, but then you get a little nervous, right? There's concerns about the time commitments. There's concerns about, do I know what I'm doing, right? If this isn't my area of law. But I think that, that's a great story for you to share, and a success story, right? You sort of weren't sure about it. I think, note to folks out there, you got all of the legal service providers provide training and provide support. And so, sort of, I don't know, take take a tip from Kathy and sort of put yourself out there, because it can be done. And you're not out there all by yourself. So, I know a lot of times our members, the litigation sort of, I think Daryl, you mentioned sort of some opportunities, but but I might have to show up in a hearing. Can you talk about some sort of limited scope opportunities, just to sort of give our folks on the audience sort of an idea of what options or opportunities there are?
Sure. No, that's as a former, I say litigator very loosely, because I don't think I ever actually appeared in court when I was a litigator, and having only done so maybe 2 or 3 times in the past 15 years, I am certainly totally. I'm there for all the folks who are a little litigation phobic or feel that's maybe not for them. Having an opportunity, and we talked a little bit, I mentioned at the Bono Center, our small business clinics that happen at the very least once a month, and you're able to meet with clients during the course of about an hour or so. You're not required to do a specific training, although we do have an attorney training that folks can watch online, and that we will be sharing information about an upcoming both live and virtual attorney training. But we rely heavily on your respective expertise. You get to choose, if there's a client that has a need, an employment need, a contract review, or lease review, or intellectual property question, and that's where your background lies. We can sort of place you there so you can talk to somebody that's in your expertise, as opposed to trying to learn something new. Some folks are really open to learn new things to do pro bono. Other folks really want to rely heavily on their own background and their own expertise. In addition to our small business clinic that happen more often, we also have limited scope issue area specific clinics. For example, I think in about a month, we're having a hiring and onboarding of employees for nonprofits and small businesses. And for the folks who are listening who are employment lawyers or have some employment expertise, we give preference to those volunteers, and they get an hour's worth of training, and then are able to sort of go through a checklist and review documents for the clients. Usually that's about a 3 or so hour commitment. We do similar clinics for corporate governance, insurance, nonprofit policies, things like that. And so we give folks an opportunity to get sort of the, I don't know that we can give them the fantastic feel-good experience that Kathy had, but we can give them a bite-sized experience over the course of a day or a couple of days. And we're actually looking at models that may extend the limited scope nature of a representation to maybe last longer than a couple of hours. That might last maybe I'm thinking maybe like 2 or 3 times over the course of a month, as opposed to just doing it in one day. The interesting thing about what the pandemic has sort of shown us is that we can be, and as Erin was mentioning earlier, we can be creative in coming up with new models that haven't been done before. For those of us who are sort of tasked with creating these models and making and trying to adjust our programs for the benefit of our clients and for the benefit of our volunteers, and to sort of stretch their expertise a bit, I think we can be creative and find sort of new ways to provide advice.
That's great. That's really great. Thank you. And Erin, how about you?
Sure. Yeah, Daryl, when you were talking, it just reminded me of how limited scope opportunities often lead to full scope opportunities. We sometimes see hesitancy for volunteers who want to help, but have some trepidation about taking on the full scope matters. So what we've seen, and which has been fabulous, is that pro bono volunteers who come to our clinics are then much more likely to take on a case, or pro bono volunteers who dive into the files, looking at a veteran's files who is seeking a discharge upgrade, says, hey, these files look scary, but they're actually not so bad. once you get into them. And I'm really moved by this veteran's story, and I'd love to stay on and help them. So that has been really, really wonderful to see in this limited scope world. Our discharge upgrade clinics themselves, I think, are really fantastic opportunities. And I want to share more about how they're structured in case that helps somebody else thinking about doing remote clinics. So we pull from our screening queue, and our screening attorneys will then write about a 1 to 2 page summary for every veteran who is attending the clinic. So we share these background summaries with the volunteers meeting with the veterans, so the volunteers don't go in blind, which is really helpful for volunteers they have a starting point with the veteran. Next, I create a checklist for every clinic for the volunteers to say, first, please go over with the veteran the scope of the meeting. Explain to them that everything is to remain confidential, that they're free to share, and that the purpose of the meeting is for NVLSP to screen their case. And give them our contact information, even though they already have it, and say that they can follow up with us at any time. So I think setting out boundaries at the outset of the meeting and the purpose and scope of the meeting is hugely important. Then I prepare a list of sample questions for the volunteers to go through with the veteran clients. And the sample questions are just a guide. And something I think is helpful for interviewing clients in general in a virtual and not virtual world is to build a rapport and to start easy and then to get into the more difficult subjects. Start out, where are you from? Where did you serve? And then get more into what happened around the time you were discharged? What struggles did you face? And I think ending on what are your goals is a nice question, and then reiterating the scope of the meeting. So our discharge upgrade cases, our clients, the volunteers for these clinics then write about a 2 to 3 page summary of the interview with the client, send them back to us at NVLSP, and we screen their case, make a decision, yes, we can help, or unfortunately, no, we're not going to be able to help this time. And then we'll send resources to the veteran either way. So they're really helpful for us to screen the case, and volunteers will often say, I'm so moved by this story and I want to stay on for their full scope case. So they have been a really successful model, and I'm really happy with them.
That's great. So do you have, once that summary is done, some people might decide they want to go on with this case, then do you have a separate sort of approach to then getting folks to take those cases?
Great question. And this goes into Kathy's tale of having a lot of support. So we really pride ourselves on mentoring. So our screening attorneys will prepare a screening memo for every case that we refer for pro bono placement. And in this screening memo, we have background facts and then the law and recommended actions. So before a volunteer takes on a case, they're able to review our screening memo and say, you know what, maybe this looks like a bit too much this time, or maybe I want to bring on a team of 3 other attorneys and we'll take this on together. So they're able to see this screening memo before they take on the case. And then within 2 weeks of accepting a case, our mentoring attorney will hold a call with the team. And following that call, we'll provide sample briefs, training manuals, all support. So we also review draft briefs and answer any questions. So we're really there all along the way until the case is filed. So our model is based off of screening and then providing mentoring support along the way.
That's great. That sounds like, I'm like, oh, that doesn't sound so hard. It sounds like there's a really great support there. That's fantastic. Deirdre, I'm going to sort of turn that question back to you too, in terms of, like, I know there are some trainings you provide, but in terms of a little bit more of the ongoing representation, can you talk a little bit about your sort of ongoing sort of training or mentorship that you all provide?
Sure. No, that's a great question. So for our individual representation cases, we've got a fantastic staff with family law experts, folks who have housing expertise, consumer law, bankruptcy, and we don't give you the case and then leave you sort of hanging out to dry. We make sure there is more than enough opportunity for you to ask questions, for you to come back to us and to get additional information throughout the life cycle of the matters that you take on. I know as Aaron was mentioning, from time to time, sort of on the transactional side, we will have volunteers who are sort of moved by the the issue, moved by the client, or feel the time is not enough during the course of a sort of limited scope representation to give the client like the best service, and we'll then say, maybe, we've had volunteers who said, well, I think they just need this, a couple more hours, and I'm happy to do that. Or I think they need like, a complete overhaul, and I'm willing to do that. And in that instance, typically they will be speaking from a place of expertise themselves, and so they will take that on. We will sort of check in to make sure that things are going well. But in the instance where the volunteer is the expert, we at the Pro Bono Center can actually take a step back. And I know for a lot of our in-house counsel volunteers, they're typically coming with some expertise in an area that when they're working on the transactional side, that we don't actually have to provide so much of that support. But yeah, in our individual representation, I mean, that's most certainly our stock and trade. We have been lucky to have both sort of internal capacity, and then we have had fantastic volunteers like our friends at Whitman Walker, who have been supportive of us and supportive in areas like public benefits. And so they have been kind enough to support us, and we make sure that our volunteers have the best sort of and safest, hopefully, experiences when working with, and most rewarding experience working with our client population.
Thank you, Daryl. That's really helpful. So we're almost out of time. I'm trying to think, sort of finish up, kind of each of you want to sort of give some advice to volunteers who are new to virtual representation, sort of a quick, I don't know, let's start with you, Daryl.
I think probably the best advice I can give sort of to start, if you're new to working with clients virtually, it's I'm sorry to be borrowing from Aaron, but I think the way you put sort of being brave and being open to and listening to your clients, I think is the most important thing. But also just sort of, if this is new to you, being willing to sort of start wherever you're comfortable starting, and then sort of taking some small steps is usually the best advice that I can give. We've had volunteers who have been practicing for 30 years and, have done very little to no pro bono, and are really uncomfortable with the idea of a pro bono client and trying to help. And, the advice I give somebody who's a first year, somebody who's who's been practicing for 30 years is, have you worked with a client before? Then you can do this. And think about our clients the same way you think about any client, the same way you treat any matter, is start off small, and slowly sort of progress. It's, if you're really concerned about it, that's why we're here to support you. But you can step out on your own and do this.
Thank you. Erin?
So I would say that my big piece of advice is that pro bono does not have to be a solo endeavor. That I always think it's better if volunteers team up with other volunteers, if in-house corporations team up with law firms. So I would expand that teaming up with individually and the broader organizations. I think it's a great way to go about accomplishing a lot in pro bono. And then just to reiterate, reminder emails, alternate contacts, following up, all of that is great in the pro bono virtual world.
Thank you. Kathy?
I'll reiterate, be brave. You have a support system, and just another plug for the chapter's pro bono committee, because there are great opportunities where you can get involved with all of these great organizations through the committee.
All right, thank you. And I'll just say, at Freddie Mac, a lot of what we do is it's the teaming up, right? We have sort of might seem overkill. We have 2 attorneys and a legal professional for each of our cases in our clinics so that people aren't out there alone. We try to do a buddy system where you bring someone along. So we are at 1 o'clock. So at this point, we need to conclude today's program. I want to thank our panelists for their time and insights. If you have additional questions, I know we didn't get to questions. We're going to circulate a slide of the contact information for the organizations that are here today for our fair and the 2 that served on our panel. Additionally, we will have a recording available on the ACC NCR website, and we encourage you to share information from today with your colleagues. I'd like to thank our panelists for their time and insight. I also want to plug an upcoming virtual event with our ACC NCR Pro Bono Committee and Maryland Legal Aid. Maryland Legal Aid is leading a breakout room today, but we're hosting a virtual brown bag session on February 24th at noon. This will be a working session on how to waive into the Maryland bar so that you can do pro bono work. You can register for that on the ACC NCR website. And with that, we'll transition to